am Shriyal Sethumadhavan, the consulting editor with the First Construction Council, and I would like to virtually welcome you all to today's webinar on Will Government Spending Accelerate Construction in 2023? I would give a quick presentation on the First Construction Council and what all our activities are going to be and what you could look forward to in the year 2023. I hope my screen is visible to everybody. So First Construction Council is an infrastructure think tank focused on providing the latest updates on the construction industry in India and dedicated to promoting its causes and needs. The Council provides a platform to promote the adoption of best practices and be the torchbearer for all policy initiatives that are needed to enhance the importance and welfare of the construction industry and be the industry's unified voice. We are supported by a very strong board of governors. So quickly introducing you to all of them. As you see, architect Hafiz Contractor, Mr. D.K. Sen, Mr. Pradeep Singh, Mr. Pratap Padode, Mr. Sandeep Singh, Mr. Sanjay Seth, Mr. Subodh Dikshit, and Mr. Sumit Banerjee all make it to the governors or the board of governors of the council. Members of the council benefit in ways more than one. This includes industry networking opportunities, understanding consumption trends, getting a better understanding of your cost, understanding the market conditions much better, and access to growth opportunities. And how do members achieve all of these benefits? Well, we have a lot of white papers and research reports that we release throughout the year that give you insights and some hard-hitting facts about the sectors and the market scenarios. We also host several events, webinars, conferences, and industry awards ceremonies. Here's a quick list of the events that we did last year in 2022. You would see our events cover right from steel to industrial to attending to the architects and builders community, technology, smart cities, infrastructure, and a lot more. And of course, we conclude our year with the Big India Construction Festival as well that brings together the entire construction industry. This is a quick glimpse to the Construction World Architect and Builder Awards that we have been conducting annually. This is a glimpse to last year. We had 153 attendees and 35 plus winners at the event. And of course, this includes India's leading architects and builders, as well as regional architects and builders. So we cover a pan-India spread through this event. The India Construction Festival, as I mentioned, is an amalgamation of the India Road Conference, Equipment India Stalwarts. We recognize and award them. We do awards as well as a conference, and the Construction World Global Awards. From this slide, you would see the mix of attendees that come to our events, giving a clear insight of how we bring the entire construction fraternity together. Of course, here is a glimpse to the event last year, the India Roads Conference, the Equipment India Awards, where you would see all the leading company managing directors present and the Construction World Global Awards. Looking into 2023, our list gets longer this time, and you would see it's very evident from the slide that I have shared with you. Of course, our today's event, why we've gathered here, also is a part of our entire series that we planned for the year. We have already kicked off. I am meeting you in February, but last month we've already had the Metro Rail Conference that was concluded, and a quick glimpse to the stalwarts and the big wigs who made it to our Metro Conference in Mumbai. And if you want to be a part of the networking and knowledge activities of the First Construction Council, all you need to do is drop us an email. The email ID is simple: contact@firstconstructioncouncil.com. So under the Infra First series starting today, a series of webinars will be conducted on a monthly basis. The series aims at bringing experienced industry stakeholders to virtually discuss and debate timely and current occurrences in the construction and infrastructure sector. This will result into a great exchange of experiences, perspectives, recommendations, and much more. Our first webinar under this series, for which we have all gathered today, is going to revolve around the topic, Will Government Spending Accelerate Construction in 2023? The Centre's master plan indicates a list of mega infrastructure projects. While the Gati Shakti is considered a huge step towards achieving India's $5 trillion economic goal, to achieve this target, report indicates that India would need 5 times more spending towards infrastructure development. Given the current global economic slowdown and increasing inflationary pressures, it is important to attract and facilitate private investments. Today's discussion is going to involve several critical points of discussions, some of which have been mentioned on this slide as well. How do we double the initial spending and ultimate economic output in light of infrastructure spend of rupees 10 lakh crore in the budget? Apart from government incentives, how can financiers further incentivize investment in green technology? What policy and factors are required to get India to a $5 trillion economy by 2025-26? And what would be the catalyzing factor of the transportation network on private investments in infrastructure? If these are your questions, and of course, if you have much more, then this and much more will be discussed by our panel today. Introducing the esteemed panelists joining us today, request you all to please turn on your videos as I would be introducing you now. Please welcome our session moderator, Mr. Rajshekhar Saha, Director, Capital Projects and Infrastructure, PwC. Mr. Saha has over 29 years of experience in all facets of large-scale infrastructure and industrial project execution. He has worked for multiple Indian and global clients in project management, contract management, and operational efficiency in the EPC domain. Prior to PwC, he has worked with KPMG, KN India, and Bharat Petroleum. Welcoming all our speakers on this panel who would be joining Mr. Saha, Mr. Padmanabhan Raja Jayashankar, Managing Director, India Infrastructure Finance Company Limited, with his experience spanning 35 years in development banking and financial domains. Mr. Jayashankar is currently the Managing Director of IIFCL, the Chairman of IIFC UK, IIFCL Asset Management Company, and IIFCL Projects. He is also a member of the Project Finance Group of the Interministerial Steering Committee for Financing of Infrastructure Investments under the National Infrastructure Pipeline. Mr. Vinayak Pai, Managing Director, Tata Projects. Mr. Pai has been part of the oil and gas industry for over 3 decades and has extensive experience in executing upstream and downstream projects and successfully growing the business in a highly competitive environment. He has held key positions in engineering design, technology, licensing, project management, business development, and operations. Mr. Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist, Bank of Baroda. Mr. Sabnavis has been a corporate economist with more than 30 years of experience across development banking, commercial banking, engineering, and commodity exchange and credit ratings. Currently, he is the Chief Economist with Bank of Baroda. And Mr. Jagan Narayan Padmanabhan, Director and Practice Leader Consulting, CRISIL, Market Intelligence and Analytics. Mr. Padmanabhan has more than 20 years of consulting experience across business strategy, corporate and competitive strategy, commercial due diligence, project feasibility, new market entry, and process and operations improvement. He leads the transport and logistics practice at CRISIL MI&A. He has led more than 300 consulting engagements across real estate, economic and industrial corridors, industrial parks, and SEZ. I would once again like to welcome this entire panel. Thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion. Before Mr. Saha takes over with the discussion, requesting Mr. Pratap Padode, the President and Founder of First Construction Council, to give us his opening remarks. This will be followed by Mr. Madan Sabnavis delivering a keynote speech, and then we would proceed with our panel discussion. A few words introducing Mr. Pratap Padode. A trailblazer who first blazed a trail in financial journalism with a chartered accountancy background, he turned to addressing the needs of the construction, infrastructure, and manufacturing sectors through ASAP Info Global Group set up in 1999. Since then, he has spearheaded India's enthusiasm for smart cities through the Smart Cities Council India set up in 2014 and now lobbies for policy changes as founder and president of the First Construction Council. Recipient of the Asian Multimedia Publishing Awards and the CIDC Vishwakarma Awards as Best Journalist. As head of the First Construction Council, Mr. Padode has campaigned for steel quality, for emission norms for construction equipment, for changes in the Municipal Act, for changes in the land acquisition policy, as he continues to infuse his enthusiasm in building India into a powerful nation. From here, over to you, Mr. Padode.
Good afternoon, members of First Construction Council, my esteemed panelists, Invitees, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Infra First series by First Construction Council. These monthly webinars will bring together experts from the fields of real estate, infrastructure, architecture, smart cities, finance, technology, all contributing to building our new India. First Construction Council completes 20 years this year, and a lot is in store from the council this year. The council is an infrastructure think tank based on the principle of integration similar to the PM initiated Gati Shakti. Interests of all stakeholders need to be met in order to make a leap, be it cement, steel, architecture, engineering, land acquisition, contracting, finance, technology, all need to be on board if we need to build the new India. So do reach out to us and join us in building India. Our topic for today is right after the budget 23-24. I must say that this was one of those rare budgets where I hardly heard any negative comments. That's a positive. And given that we had an election year ahead, that's an even stronger positive. Overall, it appears that we have assumed a common direction for our country's growth, and the challenges lie in execution. Efforts directed at facilitating and accelerating the course will be rewarding. But now I must leave this discussion to our esteemed panelists. So back to you, Shreya. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Padode. Requesting Mr. Sabnavis to please give the keynote address to the audience, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shreya, for having me out here, and good afternoon to everyone. Today we have this very engaging subject on which we'll be discussing different facets about how the government expenditure is going to help to boost the construction sector. So there are two basic things which we need to keep in mind when we're discussing this particular issue. The first is that why is it that we're all talking about government expenditure and there's so much of focus on what the budget should be doing before the budget came up and how the budget is going to shape the course of our growth path in the coming years. See, what we have seen is that India at one point of time in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 16, 17, I think those were 3 years, we really had a very high investment rate in the country. It was in the region of around 32 to 34% of GDP. This is what we call gross fixed capital formation. And then we saw that after we had all those controversies which came about in the banking sector about the NPAs, the AQR which came through, we saw there was a rapid decline in terms of the investment rate. And today it actually came down to something as low as around 26, 27% of GDP. And today we are probably in the region of around 28, 29%. And one of the main reasons is that when we had these high growth rates in investment, and our capital formation rate had reached those levels of 33, 34, which is what is really required in case we are talking of building this 5 trillion, 7 trillion, 10 trillion economies. Otherwise, these are just idle numbers which we're talking about. Finally, at the end of the day, it's investment which has to be driving this growth. And if we don't have these kind of investments and something which got stalled for a long period of time, and now we see some signs of revival, we will not really be able to achieve these goals. Now, why is it that we're talking so much about the government of India? And because see, today we're talking of this 10 lakh crores. I think everybody is very much impressed and going overboard, I would say, to a certain extent about this 10 lakh crores or 10 trillion rupees, which is being spent on capital expenditure. But let's try and look at it. India is an economy which is going to have around 300 lakh crores of GDP in 23-24. Okay. Now, if let's assume we reach a thing like 30% of that is going to be investment. So I'm talking of 90 lakh crores. So if 90 lakh crores of investment is going to come in the country, it has to be financed by somebody or the other. Okay. Who's going to do this 90 lakh crores? So today, when you're talking of the central government doing 10 lakh crores, it's maybe 1/10, 1/12 of the total. So to my mind, when we say that the central government is the one which is responsible for investment in the economy, for bringing about this boost which you're talking of, we need to be a bit guarded. Let's not go overboard. The government has been doing its role. The central government has been doing its role in terms of what should be done by increasing its capital outlay. But at the end of the day, it's the private sector which has to chip in. And that's the one which has to drive the balance which we're talking of. Of course, there are state governments which also keep spending on capital expenditure. And state capex is normally comparable to that of the central government. So last year, if the central government said I was spending 7.5 lakh crores, they would have actually spent something equivalent to around 7 lakh crores. So we're talking of around 20% is coming from the government sector. The balance 80% has to come from the private sector. And one big difference between why is it that central government normally tends to deliver, states always don't. Private sector probably has actually failed in the last few years. There are lots of reasons. There's a simple reason for it. A private enterprise will not be investing unless they see there is return on equity, return on assets, shareholder value. So I need to be profitable at the end of the day. I'm not going to invest money if I don't have enough demand. If I have enough capacity, I'm not going to come ahead and invest. Whereas if you look at the government, central government, they don't have any such constraint because the governments don't make profit. They're supposed to create infrastructure. So therefore, the central government is normally bang on target when it comes to their capital expenditure. If I look at the states actually don't have the same kind of advantages as the center. The reason being that states have been constrained by this fiscal deficit number. They're told you can spend 3.5% of GDP or GSDP in a particular year. You cannot go beyond that. If you want to go beyond that, you will have to get special permission from the center, from the RBI, and that doesn't come very easily. So the FRBM rules actually constrain the states. There's only self-constraint when it comes to the center, and the private sector is looking at profit at the end of the day, because all private companies are owned by shareholders and the shareholders want return. They're not happy to have a road constructed on which there is nobody who's traveling, whereas the center can still do it because it's supposed to do it. So that's one of the things we should keep in mind when we're talking in terms of government driving the construction sector. Now, even here, if you look at this 10 lakh crores we're talking of, just remember 1.3 lakh crores are actually transfers which are being given to states, which means that the states will also take credit for it. So in effect, it's actually 8.7 lakh crores, which the center is spending. Last year, instead of 7.5 lakh crores, it was slightly lower than 6.5 lakh crores. Now, what is that 8.7 lakh crores? It is a distribution. The largest sector is railways. You have defense, and then you have roads. These are the three sectors on which you're spending. So therefore, when we are looking in terms of what the budget is doing for overall investment, what it's doing for construction in particular, we need to be a bit guarded on this also and say that the numbers we're talking of for the construction sector is not 10 lakh crores. It's not 9 lakh crores. It's not even 8.7 lakh crores. Remove 2.2, which goes to defense, another 2.4 for railways. So then we are left with other things which you are spending on. So construction, which goes for roads, is one particular segment of the government expenditure. The other interesting thing when we are talking of government expenditure out here is that states have been found that you don't spend immediately. So even the states spend a lot on construction. They also spend a lot on roads, especially rural infrastructure. But what happens is that they don't spend in the beginning. They go slow for the first 6 months because they're not quite sure as to how the revenue will behave. So what we have seen is that maybe around 20 out of the 30 states we're talking of go very slow. They spend around 20-30% of the allocations by the time you come to 7-8 months. And then they see in case, okay, my revenue is increasing, they're getting whatever transfers are coming from the center. That's when they expedite the projects when it comes to January, February, March. So there's always a gap which is there. And in case they realize that, look, my revenue is not increasing, then they decide that I cut down on my discretionary expenditure. And therefore, they cut down on the discretionary expenditure, which is capital expenditure. So that's why they have very often fallen short of the targets which have been placed for the states. So again, when we look at the center, we normally tend to look at the capex, but I think there is something else which is residing in the budget which doesn't really come up, because I think this government has given a lot of emphasis on affordable housing. So there's a lot of expenditure which comes through the PM Awas Yojana, which is actually a revenue expenditure. Now, this revenue expenditure actually comes both under the Ministry of Urban Development as well as Rural Development. And I think that has been a significant factor, especially today when we're talking of the construction industry. I think that is what is providing whatever subsidies which are given or whatever incentives are given for housing, both urban and rural, is something which comes in the revenue account. So today when we're discussing it, let's be guarded about the numbers which we're talking of. The central government is definitely one of the drivers of overall investment in the economy. What it does for the budget is very, very significant. But at the end of the day, it's the private sector which has to do it, because there are very strong backward linkages which are built. Because today, when the center goes ahead and decides to construct a road, I require cement, I require steel, I require chemicals, so on and so forth. And as the demand for these products go up, there's a tendency for capacity utilization to go up for, say, the steel sector. Then automatically you start going in for a fresh round of investment. And that's how the investment, the so-called virtuous cycle, really begins and is played out. Another thing we should keep in mind is that when we're talking of the center or any center or the state governments, the budget is actually nothing else but an income and expenditure statement of an entity which is called the government. It could be a private sector company. Today, I'm saying it's of the government. So what really started off as an income expenditure statement where you decide as to us based on your GDP growth of 10.5%, this is the kind of revenue I'm able to get. I have a fiscal prudence map which is there. The government is very committed to moving towards 4.5% by 25-26, which means that as I move along this particular path and I know what my potential revenue is, I also know what kind of borrowing could be done in the market, then I'm able to fix what my total expenditure is. And then within that expenditure, how is it that the government manages to allocate for various things? Now, an interesting statement made by Pratap sometime back was that nobody seems to be unhappy about the budget. But just remember, this is a zero-sum game. If the government is spending 10 lakh crores on investment, that is your capital expenditure, they've actually cut down on expenditure on other areas. So whenever they actually cut down, they've cut down on subsidies, they've cut down on the rural program, the NREGA program. So I think there have been major savings which they've gotten out there because a lot of those expenditures were actually incurred because of COVID. There was a lot of relief which had to be provided. We had a free food scheme which came in. We had to give more employment in the rural areas. Therefore, the NREGA outlays were increased. We had the Ukraine war, so therefore the price of fertilizers went up, crude oil and all the related products. So accordingly, the fertilizer subsidy had to be increased. So therefore, the basic assumption made in this particular budget is that Ukraine is behind us, crude oil is behind us, global commodity prices will not be increasing. So therefore, there are lots of savings which can be had. And that's how the subsidy bill has been reduced. Besides, I think this free food program has been merged with the PDS scheme, which basically means there's no longer extra food grains which are being distributed. And whatever the savings have been made by the government is being channeled more towards capital expenditure. So this is what we as economists have always been saying, that to the extent that it's possible, the government should be focusing more on capex. Try and cut down on your revenue expenditure wherever it's possible. Now, I would say this is definitely a very bold decision which the government has taken because this is the last budget before the elections in 2024, where we will have an interim budget to begin with. So therefore, we all expected certain things which we call populist. I would not really say helping the poor is populist, but then we normally say freebies, whether the government will have more of such programs. They've actually capped all of it, which shows a lot of resolution as far as the government and the commitment towards growth. Because the government realizes today that even though we are all talking of the economy being the best growing economy, 6%, 6.5% for next year, 7% in this year. India is the fastest growing economy. But the fact remains that there is something lagging in terms of private investment. So, but just before I end, I will say that while the logical statement made is that when the government starts spending, it will crowd in private investment. That sounds very much logical. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, why has this not happened in the last 4 years? So what is it which is really holding back the private sector? Because the reason I said that the budget is an income expenditure statement is that budget is only one particular part which the government uses in order to bring about growth. There are lots of policies which come outside the budget also. Okay, so we don't have to have it necessarily in the budget. The government is always working on a real-time basis. When you see there are problems which are there in any particular sector, like I remember the time even before before COVID pandemic, when we saw the real estate sector having problems, there was a selective intervention which came in. Even post-COVID, when we suddenly thought that the ECLGS scheme should be extended to larger companies, you do it for larger companies, you do it for NBFC, you do it for the what I call the hotels and restaurant segment. So I think we have to look at government policies even outside the budget, not necessarily in the budget. The budget just gives us an indication that the government is going to spend a certain amount of money, but we need the private sector to follow up. Only then can we really realize this dream of having accelerated investment and therefore the backward linkages coming in and accelerated growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sabnavis. I must say you've set the right tone for this discussion. There's a lot of energy that has come in here and only leaves me thinking what this discussion is going to bring to the table. Over to you, Mr. Saha, to start the discussion and take it forward from here. You would have 1 hour for the discussion, and you could leave 5 minutes for Q&A as well if we have any interesting questions coming. Else, over to you from here.
Thank you, Shriyal, and thank you, Mr. Sabnavis, for a wonderful, beginning to this session, giving a complete overview of what the budget has brought about, what are its, beneficial factors, as well as certain factors that we need to look into. And I think let me start from that part that while the budget seems to have given a very good boarding, I would say, start for the private sector investments to come in. So I would request Mr. Jaishankar that what would be the role of the financial sector in further growth in the construction industry, given the current outlay of the government budget?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shah. Yeah, I first of all, I suppose, I completely agree that, this is setting the tone for, private sector investments to supplement the government investments. I suppose we have to put it that way, because I've always held that capacity generations are best done by, the public sector. And obviously, the infrastructure sector is a prime driver of most of the construction and the activities relating to that. And in the infrastructure sector, I can say that though of course I would say that the sector is still in its teenage phase, in its transformation to the third decade, I would put it that way. A lot of things have happened here. And to put the things in perspective, if you need private investments, you need to build confidence. You need to have a system which actually builds confidence amongst it's not only the private sector investors and developers, but also the stakeholders, other stakeholders, which actually have to, chip in, and we have to bring about a systemic, framework that really puts all the, confidence in the amongst the investors to bring in that kind of that level of investments into the sector. And that's precisely what has, been seen in the infrastructure sector. In the beginning, we saw buoyancy when public-private partnership as a procurement model was, introduced. We saw 2006 to 2015, 2014, the spate of investments from private sector, a lot of buoyancy. Then we saw a lull between 15 and 20. And now again, we are seeing, a small, a spurt of, enthusiasm in the sector. I can put it that in the beginning, the sector had its own learnings, and there were a lot of issues, particularly in the structural side, be it the land acquisition or the delayed approvals, and so on and so forth like that, or the contractual side, the long-term nature of infrastructure contracts, which demanded a lot of renegotiations and redressal issues, which were absolutely, lacking in the initial concession agreements, and covenants were not really very clear. And there was lack of a system which actually could address all this. But still, we went ahead, we saw successes. I would put it, that the successes were much more than the failures. So which meant that, we did overcome many things on the job learning. And we had failures, we had our downs, we saw the issues. And we also stopped to look back. We had the Kelkar committee, which actually recommended so many things so many measures to institute reforms. The reforms started in 2016, and we are seeing the reforms bearing fruit now. A lot of robustness now in the contractual systems. Institutional reforms have been there. Then we have seen, the financial issues have been sorted out to a great extent. Consolidation of banks and recapitalization of banks were included in the entire process. Then we have now new age financial instruments. We have the InvITs. We are now seeing how best we can, generate the capacities on one side and monetize them for generating more assets on the other side. So that kind of architecture is also in place. Renegotiation clauses are in place. A number of other initiatives also have been instituted, I would say, which actually is more heartening in trying to build the confidence amongst various players. And it's all visible. It's not just, it's just the reforms having been initiated. This visibility is in the form of the bond investors. Last 2 years, we are seeing bond investors very active, at least in the completed assets. Today, we have completed assets in infrastructure sector. And this is a dynamics which was never seen before. And this as an asset class is growing. So the latest bond issuance of the NHAI InvIT is witness to retail investors, participation. So I think, these all will build on to, build the tradability and consequently the liquidity and depth. So, and we are seeing the InvITs. There are today 19 InvITs, already 2.5 lakh crores AUM, and going very strong and growing very strong. So the investors, be it the private equity funds, global investors, the domestic investors, everyone interested in the participation of InvITs. It's a very good instrument for release of capital for the existing developers. So I see this as a whole lot of measures, which is actually a result of the hard work and the kind of reforms that has been instituted over the last few years. At the same time, when you said that the investors and the developer community, today there is the aspirations of the people are actually driving infrastructure and are driving the growth. And be it politically or be it economically, I think it's a very, very significant driver. And we are seeing marquee projects. Earlier, it used to be only the roads, the connectivity, which actually drove the infrastructure sector. Today, the public-private partnership and the private investments are envisaged all over. We are seeing a number of other sectors, including the power sectors, participation followed the road sectors, and now the transmission, then we had the renewable energy, then airports, then the ports, railways. So I think a host of sectors are now looking at using this mode of procurements, and there are other models like the HAM model also, which has which was an intermittent model, which has also now come into play. So this is all because we have the demand for larger projects is growing, project costs are growing, and at the same time it's all being technology driven, most of them, and the number of developers to keep pace with the number of projects domestically, I'm talking about, is not enough. So we need to kind of look at how best we can get developers we have more contractors. So that's where the HAM model can play a big role. So I suppose we are at a part of a journey where we have taken off, I suppose, but we need to regulate the future in such a way that our journey further gets scaled up in a very, very systemic level. I suppose I will stop here, and if any further questions are there or any clarity is there, I can.
Sure. Thank you. We'll come back to you. But I think what you just said about the enabling policies and financial instruments, which along with the government capex spending, would take us to greater heights. And this is where I'd like to come to Mr. Pai and ask him, with the renewed investment in infrastructure and private investments coming in, could be in various sectors, how would the construction industry keep their growth commensurate with the capex spending? Because as Mr. Jaishankar just mentioned, one of the challenges that we face are, the dearth of adequate number of proper developers or contractors on ground. Mr. Pai.
Thank you. Want to check that? Yeah, unmuted. So thank you for the question, and thank you for the comments from others. Very insightful. I think, in my view, it's a balance between the government spending and the private sector. The private sector investments will accelerate in this year and beyond. Some of the factors which contribute to it will also be things like the PLI scheme, and as well as the China Plus One policy for some of the multinationals. So FDI has to pick up, and is picking up in things like electronics, semiconductor manufacturing, etc. So those are data centers. Those are sectors in which significant amount of investments are expected. That's going to be one of the drivers for the private sector. The capacity utilization is up, so new investments will come as they cross 75%. And don't forget that last year was the first, maybe not full year post-COVID, or we already think we are in the post-COVID era. So it takes time for investor confidence, and the war doesn't help. So I think despite that dynamic, a lot of movements are happening, which will see encouraging growth in this year and going forward. Because if we have to get to the 5 trillion as fast as we can, these are investments which are very critical. Now, in terms of availability of contractor, it's a challenge in the sense that the lump sum EPC is a very unique to Asia and this part. There are very few countries in the West which actually do lump sum EPC because the risks get passed to the contractors. So that's the reason there are limited players, and most of the players in one way or the other struggle with the terms and conditions and how the project delays and overruns on projects. So if we have to really get more players firmly established, we have to find how we can make our investments more predictable. I'm not a big fan of 10 lakh crore investments or 10,000 crore investments, and half of it goes to funding delays and overruns on projects rather than actually doing them on time. So that whole volume doesn't make sense unless we get predictability, and that is where I think a whole lot of effort is required. One, there is a shortage of manpower. Forget the contractors. There is shortage of manpower at most of the sites in India today in construction, and that is because people have better things to do than working in the sun in the sites. They would like to be delivery people for the Amazons of the world, and there's a lot of other options available now, which is attracting talent away from this industry. So the only way we can do, one, I think that the NHAI and the Transport Ministry has set the standards where the terms and the way it has been done is a lot of smaller contractors are encouraged to do more and more works in things like the highway. you would hardly see, except if there is a complexity of a tunnel or a bridge or something special, big players being in the NHAI work. There are a lot of, that ministry has developed a lot of tier 2, which eventually will get to tier 1. So I think that's a good thing which is happening in overall improvement of the resource base of contractors and people, talent in this industry. So that's one thing. And then again, technology and digitization is absolutely critical. Just like, agriculture is the most, the industry where most people work, and then the next is the construction industry. Similarly, in digitization, agriculture is the least, and the second from the last is construction. So we have to break that and then get to a stage where we can use technology, digitization, artificial intelligence to really drive improved performance. Predictable project delivery should be the mantra rather than just the volumes.
Right. I think that's a very important statement. While we have consistently seen even earlier that a majority of the targets in infrastructure projects have not been met. And there are various reasons for that. And I think we'll come to that. But before that, Mr. Padmanabhan, I would like to come to you. The railway and the road sector in this current budget has been given the prime focus. Out of this 10 lakh crore, 5 lakh crore is towards these two sectors.
Yeah.
Now, given this huge investment in the transportation and logistics, how do you see the private sector contributing to it, apart from participating in, let's say, the EPC or construction contracts in this sector, and to bring about the completeness of the Gati Shakti scheme and the national infrastructure policies into a holistic multimodal logistics system in the country?
Yeah, you have weaved in multiple questions in one question, and probably I'll try and see if I can go.
I think
by one.
Yeah.
So that's a 5 lakh crore question, right? So I'll try and see if I can break it down to a few thousands. Anyways, so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. So from roads and highways and the railways have in the last 4 years kind of had 3 times more capital expenditure allocated to them. So that's the kind of growth which has happened by the budget part of it. When I take Mr. Sabnavis, the initial remarks on, let's not focus too much on the government spending. There's a lot on the private sector which needs to be done as well. And let's focus on the rest 80%. But still, enough credit can be given to the government in kind of continuously following a trend, and the predictability is what Mr. Pai also talked about. I think to that extent in this budget, the predictability is still continuing rather than suddenly shifting gears and dropping a hot potato, right? Then things would have gone really amiss. So I think that's point number 1 to be called out. Yes, of this split which has happened between roads and railways, significant uptick has happened on the roads part of it also. Even in this year, about close to, if I'm not mistaken, about 30% plus. The beauty actually is traditionally allocations used to happen, but absorption never used to happen. At least these 2 ministries over the last couple of years been able to absorb this kind of expenditure. So spend where it where it matters and where it can create an impact. I think both these ministries needs to be lauded to that extent. More so on the roads part of it, and railways is kind of catching up. So that's the in a context of why probably this is going to continuing with this kind of expenditure, because they're able to absorb it. And some of these projects, as Mr. Jaishankar said in the start, that these are HAM projects and all of that. So some of them are commitments that the government has already made. So it has to follow through, whether they like it or not. This is a commitment that they have made, and these are long-term contracts which stretches across to 10 years plus. So they would have to make those allocations. So these annuities needs to be paid out, so on and so forth. So that's one part of it. The second is in terms of, the second question was on the private capital that you talked about, and how that can be coming across, which is also was alluded to, I think, Mr. Jaishankar kind of talked about it in the InvITs, so roads and power sector, in a way, has shown a way in which the private sector can be, in a way, brought in more intelligently, if I can put it that manner, meaning build assets, asset monetization, get the private capital. So private capital wouldn't want to take the market risk. And today, I think at least on the road side, some of the private guys are asking for market risk, that is BOT transactions to be put on the table. But it has come a long way from 2011, 12, when many contractors, many BOT operators burnt their fingers, to now it has been a decade, and now some level of confidence is coming in terms of private capital. So private capital means the equity capital being put in. And that's what predominantly that we should say as private capital, not the debt or in terms of working capital that takes up when they put across. So equity capital is coming through in the asset monetization. Pension funds are some of the clear call-outs there. The CDPQs of the world, CPPIBs of the world, and others are willing to put this, buy out these operational assets, put it into an InvIT. That's one. InvIT also has HAM projects. And the second one is the TOT, which is the toll operate transfer, which is the asset monetization, which is predominantly a BOT model where the market risk is borne by the concessionaire. So that is a second part where the private capital has found its way. Is it the best and the desirable way? I wouldn't say so. It's best desirable if you are able to get a lot more people bidding for BOT projects. And that's how the build out can happen more effectively. Coming into the point of Mr. Pai, where he talked about the contractors, the ability, the maturity, all of that is best demonstrated in a BOT project. And hopefully going forward, we will be able to get private capital there. Coming to specific on the next question is on the multimodal ones that you talked about, is on the Gati Shakti, and all of that is more on the railways side. It's about a year old plus now. As any of these government schemes or thought process, this has to be over probably 3-4 years more for it to really take shape. And from an intent, it is very good. Has it started to yield results? Not yet. But some of, I hear, yesterday I was speaking to somebody, even on a dedicated freight corridor, terminal, Gati Shakti terminal has been bid out. And I think one of the private guys have bid for it and won it. So if these private terminals are going to get built out again in a very predictable manner, very transparent manner, I think the private sector capital will follow through. I think that's the ask of the private sector, that today, let's just step back. Any of the private guys, either on the investment side or the pension funds, anybody have an investment committee, have a certain set of people whose resources are very limited. So if you are able to demonstrate that, yes, these are my set of projects, this is the timeline in which I will be able to come out, and this will be concluded by this particular time frame. If these three are put together and we are able to follow through, then the private capital will surely follow, and hence resources, and hence all of that will be tied up by them. So that's where it is. It's still work in progress as well as a multimodal logistics part of it is concerned. But certainly we are in the right direction. There is multiple other spends which has happened in the railways. I can take you through on it later. But I think freight is being given an importance in this. And just for the larger audience, this panelists will anyways know, is that today, nobody is complaining of a bad road, We are now talking probably one versus the other, which can be better. But generally speaking, I've gone across the length and breadth of the country. Everybody is appreciative of the road infrastructure which is there. I think that's a significant step up in the last decade that we have made. We are making these kinds of transition in the railways, and hopefully going forward, we'll be able to kind of do the modal shift from the roads to the railways. And that is the National Rail Plan's objective of creating about close to 50% of the freight movement to come through the railways. Today, it is less than 30%. So in any of the developed economies, that's upwards of 60%. So if you're able to make that, and that's a Herculean task, easy to speak. It's just beyond imagination if they are, how and when they would be able to do it. It is a green shift. And also, I think road accidents are the third in terms of death costs, is the largest in terms of it. So I think even from a safety perspective, it makes a lot more meaningful sense to shift from road to rail, if not for anything else. So I think I'll just stop there. I hopefully have checkbox all the questions that go.
No, thank you, Mr. Padmanabhan. I think,
Mr. Saha, sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Jaishankar may have to leave sometime soon since he's got a call from the ministry. So if you could please take a few questions with him now so that, we could have his point of view come in before he leaves. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Shreyal. So, Mr. Jaishankar, since, you would not be able to be with us for long, one point which we wanted to understand is that the sustainability and green energy focus has been a major part of not only this budget but for the entire industry as a whole for ESG. So, from a finance corporation perspective, what would be some of the special incentives which are available for promoters or investors in the green energy or sustainability sectors? I also saw a few questions regarding electric vehicles and such from the participants in the meeting today. So it will be very good for us to understand a bit more about IFCL's. Right.
Well, we have set a very decent target for ourselves, and the Prime Minister has already announced the net zero by 2070, and the roadmap for that is already discussed, and I think it's the action plans are all being laid out. Going from almost a negligible proportion in the early years in this new millennium, the renewable energy mix has now become very, very significant now, almost occupying about 30% of the power energy mix. And the fossil fuel is now the fossil fuel based energy is now reducing in proportion. But yes, it will take time. We have given a very laudable target. We have already got about over 405 gigawatts of installed capacity, of which 30% is renewable sources, and the action plan relating to the non-carbon emitting sources is also in place. But what I feel, as far as your question relating to the incentives is concerned, that's very important, because I suppose the financial instruments, from the financial instruments point of view, the government has now announced the green bonds. Already, some of the actors in the renewable energy space have already raised green bonds, and to the extent of about $6.8 billion in India, globally, not in the domestic market, in the global market. And most of the issuers were, from the developers side. In the international markets, one does see incentives, because of the presence of verifiers, in addition to certification of the end use. In India, we need to develop a verification system in order to have that kind of an ecosystem. Presently, I would not look at any incentives, and in fact, we are just beginning to develop the market, and maybe yes, the incentives could be more on a market-based perspective, I would say. Otherwise, bonds are all color blurred as far as India is concerned, and you also asked about IFCL's perspectives. We have in place ESG division since 2010. I don't think any other financial institution has got that kind of a, skill set and expertise as we have, because in 2010 IIFCL was helped by various multilateral agencies to put in place such a division, and we have raised over 50,000 crores of rupees from various multilateral agencies with the support and with the certifications of this ESG division that we have. So looking at it, from a standards perspective, I think we have to also gear up, and our national standards are quite well. I won't say it's not bad. It's bad. It's not bad, I would put. But then, there are a number of issues with respect to the national standards, which the international and the global investors would require, a revisit. We have also been seeing this happening time and again when we deal with multilateral agencies insofar as projects are concerned. But yes, we have to, live with that, and we have only selected, those projects which actually, have been accepted at the multilateral agencies level, and that's a very small proportion, I would say. So there's a long way to go as far as the standardization is concerned. But more importantly, I think we have to start looking at the applications of the end use. Already the government has clearly laid out the end use of the green bonds and the green ecosystem in its maiden green bonds venture. But I think as a regulation, we don't have anything like that. And the SEBI also has only given the disclosures. So there's a lot of things which need to develop in this front. And I'm sure as we go along, we will see some premium which will develop for this segment. But as of now, I don't see much of incentivization.
Right. But I think at least it's a right direction on the green bonds side, as you said. And there are policies which are being drafted by the various state governments as well, along with the Center for providing various incentives or various policies which would help them. So thank you, sir, once again for being able to join. I understand you have a time constraint. And so any other panelists would have any questions for Mr. Jaishankar before he leaves?
Just one question, Mr. Jaishankar. I think in the RBI policy, they have mentioned something about bringing out a paper on green deposits. So since you're talking of green bonds, do you think purely from the banking perspective, there can be something called a green deposit, which pays you a lower interest rate, higher interest? I don't know how the pricing goes, because the green bonds of the government had gone at 5 basis points lower than the regular bond. But do you think there can be a green line of credit, and there could be a future for that?
Looking at it from an international perspective, see, the climate change is really, impacting a number of countries. We have seen what has happened to Europe, last summer, and it's not just Europe; it's about various other places where the climate change is really making a lot of difference in economics as such. And the social pattern of existence. So these all obviously lead to different forms of remodeling the business as and it won't be the same as it was before. Obviously, there will be barriers. Or obviously, there will be constructed barriers even for imports and for exports. Even the trade will get affected in a great way. So it's all in our interest that we develop a green ecosystem. It's not just about giving lines of credits. I think it's how we develop the foundation, in the sense the very fact that we are getting into a construction activity or a infrastructure activity. All that needs recognition as far as standardization is concerned, to call it green. That is more important. We have to concentrate on that at the moment. The focus should be there, because even if we need to export certain commodities later, I think it must pass the test of the buyers elsewhere. So going from all that point, from a very, very global perspective, coming down to where we are and how Reserve Bank of India is trying to architect this entire program. This is one such area. And I don't think, at least I do not know if there is any standards which has been prescribed for that. But yes, there is a push and there is a promotion. So I still don't see much of differential pricing as pricing is concerned. But perceived difference could be there, and perceived premia could be there. And as we go along, the deposit could be perceived as a much more specialized aspect as far as the green economy is concerned, and it could definitely be used in many other forms to kind of shore up liquidity in this system. So not much of body of knowledge now.
Just one quick follow-up question on this. This could also hold for the other panelists. See, if I'm not mistaken, construction is supposed to be one of the most polluting, or it's being listed. So today, when we're talking of greening of the, everybody's turning green. Well, even when you're talking in terms of green bonds, can construction actually be a place where it could be diverted to? I mean, will anybody favor construction as an activity, given the fact that it's
in fact, yes, IIFCL has a subsidiary company which is called the IIFCL Projects, which is the certifiers for green bonds and the standards for green funds. We work with climate bond initiatives. There are standards which actually define buildings, and we have a couple of buildings in India also which are actually green buildings. But I think a kind of promotion has to be undertaken to actually exhibit what is the cost difference and what is the economics involved in creating these green buildings. If you actually look at it, there are a lot of economics involved, because there's the kind of electrification that is used and the natural lighting, and not only that, the materials that are used for construction of these buildings. There is a lot of economics, and it would be rather 10 to 15% less costlier than a normal precast or a reinforced concrete building. But and the operational costs, looking at the usage of electricity, the kind of other maintenance costs that are required, that is also very, there's a significant lower cost to that. But I think we need to actually start a promotional exercise on that. Until that is there, you really don't see much of developers taking interest on these, because availability of such skill sets, availability of the materials, availability of labor, a lot of things, if you have to put such things, the labor is the first and foremost thing that comes to mind. They should know how to go about it. Of course, we have to also hire the appropriate skill sets as far as the architecture is concerned. So a lot of scope, absolute, great potential for this. But it's a matter of, it's a matter of fact that presently this kind of thing is, I don't see much of traction that is actually happening in this space.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again for your time. Thank you. So I think the focus that has been coming up is that whether the increased budget spending and the spending which should be triggered from the private investments, how much the construction sector would benefit from that? There is, of course, a direct relationship between more capex spending and more construction. But Mr. Sadnavis, do you see a direct correlation between the two, or do you think that it can have a higher, the construction industry could have a higher growth rate than what is the budget spending, or it could be the other way? It could be inversely proportional to some extent as well.
No, I think there would be a directly proportional relationship between the two, because if the government is going to spend especially on roads and housing, we could expect to see a multiplier effect in terms of overall growth in the economy, in terms of the backward linkages which are created to the related sectors. Now, this was mentioned by somebody in the housing sector, for example, that there are 150 industries which get linked to a single housing project. So if this is true, or even if it covers 50, 60 industries, I can see a major sign of a revival which could take place on account of this spending which the government is doing, irrespective of whether this number is large or not. But the fact that the government is spending this amount, say 5 lakh crores, which we're talking of, that itself would be sufficiently good to provide a booster to these particular industries. And more than the capex, as I mentioned earlier in my initial remarks, what they're doing in the Awas Yojana, where they're giving a subsidy, you're paying certain amount to people in the form of a subsidy for taking a loan for buying a low-cost housing unit. I think that has a equally great potential as far as the housing sector is concerned. And the fact that this is permeating not just the urban areas, but primarily the rural areas, I think it's a very good step which has been taken. And more important, it has been persevered by the government. So that's how we're seeing the incremental boost. So almost even last year when we saw that, whenever we were analyzing the core sector data, seeing why steel, cement doing well, the reason always went back to saying, okay, there's not much happening on the private sector, but on account of the housing thrust which has been given, especially the affordable housing, we have seen a significant kind of push which has come from this industry. So I think it's a very, very positive thing which has multiplier effects.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Pai, coming to that part of it, while it's given that, as Mr. Sabnavis just said, that the construction sector is going to get a boost. Now, we have seen that the project completion or project delays have been an integral part of Indian projects, I think globally as well, but maybe a little more so in India as per the statistics. So what do you see as the major execution challenges that are leading to this cost or time overruns? And what would be your suggestions to improve these areas?
So I think the execution challenges, as I said, predictability of projects is a definite challenge, and the reasons are manifold. I think, as you said, there is a market difference between the results of projects. I mean, projects gets delayed. There are overruns on project, but not to the extent that we see in India, honestly. So one of the reasons actually is that very little time spent on front-end definition of the project, of planning for the projects before they are actually put on the ground or tendered out. Globally, in terms of engineering effort, almost 25 to 30% of that effort is done before the tenders are out and the concept is finalized. I think here it is, a small agency which is called to do an initial cost estimate, do some preliminary designs, and just tender it out, and then tell the contractor to take all the risk for that design. And so that poor front-end definition never goes out of the project life cycle. So if there were one thing we have to improve, and there are a lot of other things like right-of-way issues, and see, I would say that clearer front-end definition, more thoughtful planning of the project before they are tendered and go into execution is absolutely critical. And there are some fundamental differences in which how we behave and versus how it is done globally. In India, the moment a project is triggered, you want to do a Bhumi Pujan. On the next day, you want to see 1,000 people at site. And the only conversation which I have in any project which I go is, how many people do you have and how many can you increase? globally, especially when, I was in the oil and gas space, especially in the US Gulf Coast where the labor is not available, you would always go the latest possible time to start the site. After you have secured all the designs, you have, planned all the supply chain, have all the support, then go and really hit productivity. Productivity as a measure is significantly given more importance globally than in India. We don't track labor productivity. We only track the number of people. Very few companies or even in the review mechanism, there's nothing called labor productivity as much as it should be spoken about, because we have this misconception that labor is cheap and there is abundance of labor. So I think that fundamental thought process is one of the significant headwinds for us to do projects on time and more predictably.
Correct.
Mr. Saha, if you don't mind, as an economist, I would like to ask you all the people in this particular business. Now, see, as the RBI has been increasing interest rates, we're saying there is a perfect transmission or good transmission which is taking place. Now, is this a factor which also comes in the way of execution of projects? Cost overruns could come. We saw global commodity. That's one part of the interest factor. Second is we see that even global commodity prices went up last year very sharply. So all that will be affecting the execution of projects. Have you a view? Because
it does.
Yeah,
it does significantly. To some extent, I think at least in some of the ministries there is a recognition of this, and there are price variation clauses which are attached to the contract. So if the commodity prices goes up based on some indices, the cost is recalibrated to some extent. Though it's not fully compensated, it's at least part of it is done. But the cost of delayed projects and again in this industry, the construction industry, it's always about cash. The cash cycle is the one which actually significantly liquidates the ability of the EPC infrastructure companies to do things on time. It's not about actually because what happens is, in addition to a poor front-end definition, especially on the government side, there is a very convoluted process for dispute resolution. So one, you don't define things very clearly. And where that leads to a dispute because the definition is not clear. So, most of the times, either because of right of way or because the tender did not capture it correctly, there is a dispute. And then it takes 3 to 5 years to get that resolved, though there are now alternate mechanisms being talked about. So then it becomes cash guzzlers. So you're working, this industry, the bigger problem is not profitability or the volume, it's the working capital. And that's a big problem because of, the system, the way it is and it is set up. And that has to be, if we have to build a $5 trillion economy, the present is not sustainable. No, EPCs cannot survive and build that $5 trillion.
A very, very important point, Mr. Pai, which you just said. And also taking forward Mr. Sabnavis's question that, okay, I would ask Mr. Padmanabhan here, the high interest rates or the increase in interest rates that, which Mr. Sabnavis spoke of, and the cash flow issues that EPC contractors are facing in significant number of projects, at least in government projects, and I think to a large extent also in private projects, because in India, private clients also act like government in a very rigid manner. So what do you think needs to be done to improve the cash flow positions of contracting firms in our country to actually accelerate the construction progress and derive maximum value from our capex spent?
So it's an age-old problem. The solutions are age-old. Nothing new I'm going to say in this. I think it starts from even the project thinking part, correct? How you are scoping the whole project, what goes into the whole DPR part. You should create a road where a road is possible, and not just where a road is possible on a Google map, and not on the real road where it needs to be done. And this is not a joke. It has happened multiple times where people have created DPRs by just seeing Google Earth, and then what the Earth gives is completely different from what the Google gives. So, and then people have bid on those parameters, and there has been inhabitants there, a lot of stuff, structures there, which has come up. Project delays happen. This whole working capital is an offshoot of that. I think the starting point is having a rigorous project preparation. If we are able to do that efficiently, more than 50%, or even for good contractors, all of these worries will be taken care of, because you would bid for what is actually there on ground and can be seen, and not. And we have multiple infrastructure projects in which classic example is like, say, if your port of 6,000 crore has to be bid for, it is probably bid out in very efficient time when it is not to be done in that way, and the project cost can go haywire. What that you have bid for 6,000 could end up with 9,000 crore also, because the seabed and the siltation and whatnot can be completely different. And the guy who has bid for, if it was a PPP, BOT kind of a thing, has no recourse to what if something has to stall in between. So these really impact. So it's actually the interest cost and the going up of it is a very small problem in the bigger scheme of things. That happens in every other industry, right? So if suddenly you open sudden interest cost, what would you do? So and so is the benefit you derive if you've been in the longer term, that if it goes down as well, or of the commodities, you will get the benefit. That's actually of a lesser problem than these grassroots really issues, which needs to be taken care of. And time and again, we have burnt our fingers, continue to do the same mistake. And the second part of it, at least at the central government agency level, there is a certain amount of capacity which has got built. When I say capacity, the ability to at least put forward a project which is somewhere meaningful in its nature. But at the state government level, there is just really no capacity. Suddenly a state government is taking a 10,000 crore, 15,000 crore kind of a project and its implementation. Where is the institutional capacity I'm talking about to prepare those kind of checks and balances, the kind of rigor in monitoring that project? The guy will honestly will not know what needs to be done if there is going to be a query put across by the contractor. Just completely clueless. With good intentions, he just doesn't know, because he's not been primed to do such large projects. So I think, so as somebody mentioned, if you have to go through a $5 trillion economy, there's a lot of capacity building which needs to be done, institutional capacity building which needs to be done. Technology transfer, who keeps track of today? It is all that has been done, donkey's years before. Nobody wants to change it because nobody's got updated with the new technology. They really do not know how to approve a particular project if something new comes up. So the point I'm saying is that many of these has financial implications. It gets stalled somewhere. The file will go and get stuck because if you want a change in that clause, that nobody knows how to act on it, and hence nobody wants to take an action on it, with the fear that they will get pulled up if for right or wrong that they do something on it. So with all good intentions, there is time flows by, and I think in the opening remarks somebody talked about the cost overrun of all of this is significant, right? So the 10 lakh crore, whether everything is going for even the building of it is, or is it just covering up the cost overrun, which was accrued because of the past project. So everything adds up. So that's what it is. Good project preparation, institutional capacity, and the private sector, and somewhere even a bit of trusting the private sector as well in what they bring to the table, and then taking quick action on outstanding issues. And then there's a lot of other things that the additional system should not, should pat on the back of the guy who has taken a call, right or wrong, rather than to pull him up every time something goes wrong. That's again some issues.
Right. I think again that gives a very important point which has come up, and I'd like to ask Mr. Sabnavis on this. The institutional capacity, whether they're government agencies, mainly as Padmanabhan just said about the state government agencies, it could be otherwise. Uh, what could be a possible role of the financial institutions, the lenders in this? We know that World Banks or certain such multilateral funding agencies built in certain institutional building capabilities of the uh, organization that they are funding, whether it's a government department or such. Uh, and as we understood that to enhance the construction progress and quality of delivery, these institutional capacity building is very important. How do you see the banks, the PSU banks in India taking this forward?
No, I think this is a very important question because in the late 90s or maybe early part of the century, I think when we decided to go in for universal banking, that was the time when we had specialized DFIs which had actually had that kind of knowledge in terms of financing infrastructure and other long-term purposes for which funds were lent. I think that is something which we lost along the way because it was felt that commercial banks can do it. And I think the way in which commercials bank, there's a basic ALM mismatch which is there. So I don't think they ever did have the ability to really lend for long term because they were generally meant, if you look at typically a bank's long-term lending is for 3 to 5 years. You don't go for the 10, 15 years. And somehow I think we have also lost that particular expertise along the way because I think whichever experiments which we had in terms of having institutions which can take care of such kind of lending, they all got converted to commercial banks. Okay, so I don't want to take names, but that's what really happened. So which means that viability of long-term finance is something which is a serious issue. So now I think they have this institution, NABFID, which has come up, and we need to see how that really takes on. Because, see, the thought process all the time was that there would be a parallel development of the corporate bond market, and there would be specialized instruments which would come through which the infrastructure companies would be in a position to borrow. But we saw even that did not really take place because if you're not AAA, AA, you don't really get access to the corporate debt market. We also tried this business of enhancements. I think IFCL was one of the organizations which was supposed to take a lead out here. I'm not quite sure as to how well that worked out. RBI brought in certain enhancements for infrastructure projects for banks. That was not really taken on. And it's the same case of saying, if I don't understand how it has to be done, how do I really go ahead and do it? So everybody prefers to do the safer lending, which you are actually familiar with, which actually makes sense. So I think that's been a major lacune today in the Indian system. And I've always maintained that we need to go back to the concept of a DFI. I think we are thinking of it after pushing them out 20 years back. I'm not quite sure how the whole thing will work out. Now today we're talking of REITs, we're talking of InvITs. I think these are all definitely good ideas. But given the kind of quantum of investment which is really required, do we really have clear idea about how we're going to go about financing them? And I think I had worked in the rating agency, I think just like Mr. Padmanabhan, earlier I was working at CARE. And there was always this issue of saying that how do we really do this infra finance, the ratings of it, how do you get the enhancements? Can you push it up by 1 notch, 2 notches? Everything has been tried. I think he'll be in a better position to explain as to how we were frustrated trying to work out how this would happen. And generally one was quite happy saying that let's do the conventional kind of lending, conventional kind of rating, because it is a complex issue. So I think financing of infrastructure in the private sector is definitely a problem. And I think that's one of the reasons as to why we all feel that it's the government which has to do it, because the government doesn't have to really bother about ratings. In that way, you have money, you put it for a certain project and it goes through.
Right. Okay. Thank you, sir. I think we are nearing the time. One last question that I'd like to ask Mr. Pai. We are getting into a number of, I would say, enabling factors for enhancing the construction progress, as we found out. One part that we are seeing is the increasing use of technology interventions in engineering and construction. If you could speak about some of the major developments in this area and how would it enhance the progress, construction progress on field.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very relevant to the discussion we have had in terms of making things more predictable. These solutions are available, and different industries in the construction space or the EPC space are at different levels of maturity. Take, for example, the oil, gas, and hydrocarbon business. Any of the multinationals or any of the majors globally as well as in India, you would never do a project without a full three-dimensional model of the project, fully integrated with all the detailing done, the bill of quantities coming out of the model, because the safety is an issue there. So the adoption of technology has been done in that space for many years, and it's very firmly entrenched. Unfortunately, in the infrastructure construction space, this technology is seen as a cost without really understanding the benefit it gives. So everyone thinks that if I have to do BIM, I have to spend X, so why should I do it? The government also, or I wouldn't say the government, but the counterparties or the ministries who are getting this done are also not clearly focused on it. I had a conversation with one of the ministries and said, you should push more technology. And they said, yeah, we mandate in all our tenders that BIM should be used. And I said, yeah, but you can get a BIM model done for 10-15 lakhs, but not use it. How will you ensure that the drawings come out of the BIM model? And so this is basically, those solutions are there. They are 5D, 6D. For example, on one of our projects, we are integrating our planning into the three-dimensional model. So you actually get a work plan in 3 dimension and the approvals for work done is done through an app. A lot of this is actually there. It's only the will to implement and to see the value of it rather than looking at it as a cost is the fundamental change required in the thinking of all stakeholders. And I think that will create a lot of effect on predictable projects.
Thank you, Mr. Pai. I think we have come almost to the end of today's discussion, so we just got a couple of minutes left. Before I leave it open for taking some questions for the panel, I'd just sum it up in 3 short sentences. The takeaway from today's meeting obviously has been that yes, the increased budget spending announcement is going to positively impact the construction industry. However, there would be other enablers in the form of better contracting or mechanisms or dispute resolution mechanisms in these contracts, better scoping and front-end engineering or detailed project reports prepared before these projects are tendered out, and also the risk sharing between the project owner, whether it's government or it's the the private, and on the other side the contractors, needs to be worked out in a balanced manner so that effective progress or effective development can be carried out in these areas. So I think these are the major takeaways, and this is no rocket science, but this has been spoken of for a long time. But now I think with the government, as we understand that the institutional capabilities have increased in the government, as we understood from various panelists. Introduction of technology has increased significantly over the last few years. I think NHAI has been in the forefront of it to a great extent, as well as a number of I would say new guidelines under the PPP contracting model or the EPC contracting model that we are seeing is, I think, taking us or giving us a look of a brighter future ahead, where the construction progress would actually correspond to the fullest of CapEx utilization. With that, I think thank you once again to all the panelists. But before we conclude, Shriyal, if we need to take some questions from the audience today.
Yes, so Mr. Saha and all the panelists, thank you so much for this discussion and thank you for summarizing it up so accurately, Mr. Saha. We do have some questions in the chat box, but in the interest of time, we would not be able to take all of it. But what I have also seen is I think you were glancing through them because I seen you cover it in as part of your discussion. And I knew you had your eyes on there. So in case you think there is any such aspect that was untouched and you want to take it up, we would keep open for one question. If you could just quickly, based on your discretion, look at the chat box, else we would have to conclude this discussion for today.
Thank you, Shreel. I think we have covered most of the areas. If we have a couple of minutes, I would like to ask one interesting question which has come to Mr. Sabnavis. That is there any framework on climate-related financial risks or any such things are being planned currently?
No, I don't think I'm in a position to comment on it. I'm not aware of it. So. I think I'll bounce it to Mr. Padmanabhan because the rating company maybe they've come across such things.
Yeah, sorry, come again.
Sorry, there was a question, Mr. Padmanabhan, on that. What will be the framework on climate-related financial risks? Is the government planning to bring any framework on climate-related financial risks? This is, I would understand the question. This is from Mr. Jay Surya. If you have any clarification.
No, I have not done it personally. Yeah, I'm not exposed to this part of it on the climate.
Okay. Yeah. I think it was also, it's not really a core part of today's discussions as well. But Mr. Jay Surya, I think from someone from the audience today can get back to you on this.
Sure. And we have made a note of all the questions. So even post the event, we could get back to our attendees with some answers. Having said that, thank you so much, Mr. Saha, for leading this discussion with us today. And Mr. Pai, Mr. Padmanabhan, Mr. Sabnavis for joining us today and bringing such great insights to the table. Well, this was just the beginning of the Infra First series. And I think we've had a great start with all your support. Thank you, our attendees, for joining in today. And definitely, I see some interesting questions and much interestingly, they got covered in the flow of the discussion. I would see you all soon with our next webinar under the Infra First series. When and what it is going to focus on is something that we would keep you all updated with soon. But do keep joining me, and in case there are any specific topic of discussions that you think we need to bring to the fore, you can write back to us. Thank you so much once again, everybody. And it was a pleasure to have you all join us today. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to First India Council. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.